So we're in this series, Thriving in Babylon, looking at kind of the idea that our culture is getting a lot more godless than they are God-filled. It's kind of interesting that, Jeff mentioned the Powerball. Last week I gave you a list of ISIS, the mass shootings that we've had, the healthcare system, the upcoming election, gun rights, our country still struggling with racism, gay rights, Christian values meaning very little, and more it's meaning very little. But another way you can see that our nation is becoming more godless? Look at how quickly the Powerball rises. Because if you think about it, why are people buying tickets? Because they think that money is going to change their life. But statistically, when we look at the people who have won, what has it actually done to their life? It ruined it. Why? Because their hope in life was in that money. They thought that money was going to change everything. Well, it doesn't. It's consistently being proven that it does not change your life. So today we look at how we prepare. How do we prepare to live in a society and a culture that is becoming more and more godless? We looked at Daniel and his circumstances last week. He was kidnapped from his home, taken captive by the Babylonians to a foreign land in Babylon, which was literally the personification of evil. He was forced to serve an egomaniac king, Nebuchadnezzar. His name was changed from Daniel, which means God is my judge, to Belshazzar, which means Bel's prince. Which Bel is actually a title for the god Marduk that the Babylonians worshipped. He was forced to study and learn for 3 years the dark practices of the occult. Your Bible teacher or Sunday school teacher never told you this, but he was castrated in order to be a servant of the king and be around the king's harem. Everything about Daniel's new life in Babylon went against the God that he worshiped. But here's the thing, the key. He never stopped worshiping his God. He never gave up. We look at his life and we see that he just didn't simply go into this culture and simply survive his time there, but he literally thrived as a believer in the one true God. So how can we thrive in a world that's continuously becoming more and more godless? The first thing I want to point out to us is that our faith has to be tested. Our faith has to be tested. We don't like this at all because it's not easy. You see, our faith has to be tested, kind of like the cashier at Marsh has to test the money that you give him. I'm sure you've all seen that, they pull out the little marker and they check to see if you have any counterfeit money. But money today is becoming more and more difficult to counterfeit. But you see, there's something in our lives, in our world, that is not so easy to detect sometimes, and that's our faith and how it can be also counterfeit. In Daniel's day, it was circumcision. It was the observance of the Jewish rituals, and a direct tie to Abraham and Sarah that deceived so many people. They thought that all they needed was to be right with God. And they figured that circumcision and observing the rituals through the Jewish customs would balance out their lack of injustice and mercy and humility. One example of counterfeit faith that can be disguised for us today is good intentions. Good intentions. Jesus tells a parable about good intentions. In Matthew 21, he says, "What do you think? There was a man who had 2 sons. He went to the first and said, 'Son, go and work today in the vineyard.' 'I will not,' he answered, but later changed his mind and went. Then the father went to the other son and said the same thing. He answered, 'I will, sir,' but he did not go. Which of the 2 did what the father wanted?" "The first," they answered. Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to show you the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him, but the tax collectors and the prostitutes did. And even after you saw this, you did not repent and believe him." Could you imagine being one of the teachers of the law? Could you imagine being the high priest, the man who knew everything there was to know about how to be a God worshiper? He followed the law to a T. He did everything that he had to do. But then this Jesus guy comes along and says, the tax collectors, who are considered the scum of the earth, and the prostitutes are going to enter heaven before you. I would hope that would be a wake-up call to them. But Jesus clearly tells them it wasn't. You missed the point. I like what Larry Osborne, a pastor out in California, says about good intentions. He says, "Yet despite what Jesus said, many of us still tend to equate good intentions with genuine faith. If you don't believe me, just listen to the things we say at funerals. It doesn't matter how godless someone's life may have been. If we can find the slightest evidence of a fleeting nod to God or a momentary passing desire to follow Jesus, we'll highlight it and assure everyone that the deceased is now in a better place. The absence of spiritual fruit doesn't seem to matter, nor does the presence of truckloads of fleshy fruit. It's as if the fruit of the Spirit has been relegated to extra credit status, an optional accessory for those who are really into Jesus. And in its place, we've designated good, sincere intentions as the ultimate proof for spiritual birth." Good intentions. For us to be prepared for battle, our faith has to be tested. King Nebuchadnezzar decided he needed a 90-foot golden statue. And once it was completed, he had an even better idea. I'm going to make everyone come out into the field where this statue is, and I'm going to make everyone bow down and worship this golden image. And if you don't, I'm going to throw you into the fire furnace. So the edict goes out to everyone. Everyone knows what's coming. When they hear the horns start playing the music, that's the cue. Bow down and worship the golden image. This was it. This was the big one. The question for Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as you may know them. See, they also had their names changed. This became a question of whether or not their faith in God was genuine, or whether the last 3 years that they were forced to study the dark arts turned their faith counterfeit. Well, the music began, and everyone begins to fall down on their hands and knees and worship this golden image, except for 3 guys. I can imagine them kind of watching and looking around. Everyone begins to fall down and worship this golden image. As you can imagine, the king was not very happy about this. Daniel actually says that he was furious with rage. Nebuchadnezzar confronts Daniel's 3 friends, and he goes up to him and he asks them, "Is this true that you will not bow down and worship the golden image?" I love their response. Daniel 3:16-18. To which they replied, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Their faith was genuine. They stayed true to their faith. And because of that, Nebuchadnezzar respects them in being so brave, and he lets them go home. Nope. Into the furnace they go. But you see, for us today, what happens with our good intentions, we meant well and we stood up for our faith, but the next step, where it gets even a little harder for us, we tend to start backpedaling. Joke's on us. We just thought you were going to, we wanted to see how real you were about throwing us into the fire. But now that we know that you're serious about this, we'll do what you wanted us to. You see, good intentions gives in the end. Those of us who walk away from God in anger and disillusionment in the midst of their suffering never do so because their test was too hard. They do so because their faith was not genuine. Have you ever known someone that has gone through a tragedy in their life and they blamed God for it, and they just wanted nothing to do with God? Anybody? Am I the only one? It happens quite a bit. You see, it's really a faith issue. Because they don't understand God. They haven't truly put in their faith in him to know that he's in control. But none of this is meant to simply imply that genuine faith does not struggle or falter or at times just simply fall flat on its face. Think about it. Abraham lied. Moses had a hot temper. David committed adultery, and Peter denied Jesus. Just because these people failed didn't mean that their failure was their final straw. You prepare for battle by remaining faithful through the boot camp of your life. You see, in each case, their failure was followed by a very important thing. They repented, they got up, and they began to move forward again in their faith. They repented. for what they had done, and they turned back to God. So I want to look at 5 things this morning. 5 things that we can't survive or thrive without. The first one is obedience. Obedience. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." This kind of obedience does not come naturally. This is big time talking obedience. Lean not on your own understanding. So when you don't understand why something is happening to you, when you don't understand what your next step is, you lean on God, trusting that he is guiding you. He is directing your path, and you submit to him. That's one of the hardest things for people in today's society to do, is submit. Because no one likes to be under someone else. No one wants to be under the control of someone else. It doesn't come naturally. It has to be learned. Obedience has to be learned. Even Jesus had to learn obedience in this way. Hebrews 5, 7, and 8. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son, though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. He learned obedience from what he suffered. Jesus, the Messiah of the world, all of us are saved through him. And he had to learn obedience through suffering. How do you think we get to learn obedience? Through suffering. Number 2, perspective. When we don't have perspective, we evaluate and we extrapolate without putting God into the equation. When we don't have perspective. When perspective is lacking, unfortunately, we usually don't understand it. We don't see it in front of us. For example, why is it that a 2-year-old thinks that waiting 5 minutes is an eternity? Why does a trust fund baby think that flying in coach is the end of the world? Why does a little league parent scream and yell at an umpire's bad call? A 2-year-old doesn't understand time. A trust fund baby has no clue how the rest of the world lives. And a little league parent has no idea how insignificant this game is going to impact his child years, days, or hours from that call. Perspective. You have to put things in perspective. And a lot of times that means not yours. So that we're not blinded by our own. Number 3, endurance. I think this is one of the hardest ones, honestly. As a runner, I immediately thought about this in running terms. So bear with me. I hope this will help you. Do you know why people hate to run? Because it hurts, exactly. Running stresses the human body to the crest of its limits when your body is not physically trained. But the key ingredient to being a distance runner is endurance. Endurance on the spiritual level can turn a lot of good-intentioned people into spiritual couch potatoes. The spiritual test is taking too much out of you, but instead of pushing through the pain to train your soul, for the next spiritual test. We give up because it's too hard. But the only way you grow in your endurance is to continue to push yourself beyond what you are capable of doing. You see, it's only when you've done something many times and your body is physically trained for it that it becomes easier. Standing through the tests that you will face in your life is a matter of whether or not you're willing to stand in the middle of it and continue to go through it. Because each battle prepares us for the next one. Each battle that we face, each test that we face, literally prepares us for the next one. Number 4 and 5, they kind of go together. Confidence and courage. See, veterans at something handle pressure a lot better than someone who hasn't been there before, because experience gives one confidence and the courage to face the next test. How do we have confidence? What do we look for in confidence? Moses once gave this kind of pep rally before he was sending his troops into battle. In Deuteronomy 20:3-4, he said, "Today you are going into battle against your enemies. Do not be faint-hearted or afraid. Do not panic or be terrified by them. For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you victory." Two things has to happen there. For us to have victory, we have to have God leading us. The second thing is we have to go with Him. We can't send God and say, "Go right ahead, you go, I'll be back here waiting when you get back." I've known some runners like that. That's not the good ones. You don't want them on your team. You want the people who are going to go with you. You want God to go with you into the battle. If we don't realize that God is going before us, we're not going to have confidence. Because we've seen what happens when we do things ourselves. We tend to get the same results. We tend to fail multiple times. But when you look at Daniel's story, we see that there's a progression that takes place. We see that he's taken into this Babylonian culture against his will, and he's forced to do ridiculous things that no one ever would want to do. But he doesn't complain. He just knows that God is in control. He could have complained about changing his name, but he didn't. He just let him. Notice that whenever you're reading through Daniel's story, it will say Daniel, also known as Belshazzar, he's writing the story. So he gets to put whatever name he wants to in there. So for the people who might have known him by something else, he puts that Babylonian name in there. But he knows who he is. He knows the name God gave him. No one's going to change that. No one's going to take that away from him. And then we see that he has to eat the food off of the king's table, but he knows that that goes against God's law. So that's a test. What am I going to do? So he finds a way around it. The guy that's in charge of all of the servants ends up feeding them secretly on their own diet. And as long as they are just as healthy and strong as the people eating from the king's table, he continues to feed them whatever they want with a kosher meal. And then he's asked to interpret a dream for the king. But the king wasn't going to tell him what the dream was. He does it. Then there's the whole furnace issue. And then the lion's den. You better not pray. He was set up. You have to stop praying to your God, and you have to start praying to the king. Whatever. He continues to pray. He knows what's going to happen to him. He knows he's going to be caught. He knows he's going to be thrown into the lion's den. But he has the confidence and courage to know that my God is with me. How did he get to that point? He continued throughout his life to make the decisions based on his relationship with God and no one else. The only thing that dictated his decisions was the God that he worshiped. And that's how he lived his life. It's amazing how many champions have failed miserably the first time they appeared on the big stage. It's no difference in the spiritual realm either. Our failures don't have to define us. It all depends on how we respond to our failures. If we curse our luck, blame others, and fail to take responsibility, we'll continue to fail. But if we face the facts, accept responsibility, and humbly get back on the right path, our failures can lay the groundwork for our future success. Hebrews 12:11 says it this way: no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees. It's through our tests that we'll be prepared to face what's before us. You see, because God knew what was next for Daniel. He knew the next test that he would face and what he needed to become stronger in his faith. When we're prepared for battle, we know that God is in control of who's in control. See, God's not surprised. He knows what's coming next. And we know when God knows what's coming next and we put our faith in him, that our faith can be strong because we have the hope of a God who is in control of everything. So what happens to our little rotisserie friends in the furnace? When the king looks into the furnace to see the 4 men dying a horrible death, he actually sees 4. Because the 3 men went in. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But you see, Nebuchadnezzar, being the egomaniac, crazy king that he is, he wanted to see them suffer. And so he looks in the side of the furnace and he sees 4 people walking around unbound and not being engulfed in flames. And so he just yells into them, "Come out!" So they come out and he sees what has taken place. This is what he says: "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save this way." What kind of faith do you have?